typical introduction. Okay, so as you all know, I'm Shelley Konyk. I'm the managing partner of Konyk and Lemme, Pllc. I am happy to be here with my favorite association, Buena Vida, to give you your board certification seminar. Many of you have taken this every year, which is commendable because you get more familiarized with the different details that we go over. Each year you pick up different portions of it. The whole purpose of this class is so that you're compliant with Florida law, which says that you have to either sign a piece of paper that says that you will comply with all regulations, read the law, know your documents, and you won't violate anything in there. I, as an attorney, would never sign something like that because of the fact that you can't attest to all of those things. So the safest way and the best way for you all to comply with the law is to do the board certification class. Now, many of you have taken this class last year or the year before, and you've had a continuous service on the board. You really don't need to take the class again if you've had continuous service. It's good for your term of service as long as there's no interruption. But as I said before, it's not a bad idea to refresh yourself and maybe pick up different details or become apprised of different nuances in the law as it changes. I would just turn you to your books only to look at this one page, which is to me one of the most important pages in here. It's an illustration showing the hierarchy of governing authority. And obviously the highest law in the land is federal law, which trumps everything below it. Many times I'm asked as to what area of federal law you guys are subject to. Well, cable, which you brought up earlier, cable stuff, that's FCC federal law. There's all kinds of federal law that you guys have to deal with, even though you may not even be aware of it. The next highest law is state law, followed by your local ordinances, which are the Village of Wellington or Palm Beach County, followed by your declaration of covenants, which you should be familiar with somewhat, your articles of incorporation, which are merely what allowed the corporation to exist in the state of Florida. That's what started it all. And then your bylaws, followed by Robert's Rules. Robert's Rules have the least significance. But I will tell you that the best thing for you guys to take away today, I'm always called by board members and they say, our bylaws say, well, 9 times out of 10 they're referring to their declaration. The declaration is what deals with your covenants and the things that you're restricted from doing or required to do as a homeowner in your community. Your bylaws really deal with your corporate law. They are when you have your meetings, how you vote, and things of that nature. So 9 times out of 10, when you're saying to me, our bylaws say, it's really your declaration. It's just a matter of knowing the difference between the different governing documents. Sorry. Does anybody have any questions on the hierarchy? I don't think you do. That's pretty clear. Okay. No. The question was, are the bylaws abbreviated from the declaration? They deal with a whole different thing. Declaration deals with real estate law, which is, can I paint my house? Can I mow my own lawn? Things like that. Things that concern the property. Bylaws are concerned with the corporation, the management and running of the day-to-day meetings, you know, all the different things that you're required to do as a board. So the bylaws really govern what the board does, and the declaration governs what the community does. The rules and regulations are an offshoot from the declaration. The authority for your rules and regulations originates in your covenants, which is the declaration. So rules and regulations are usually just rules that are extracted either from the declaration or mandated by the board pursuant to whatever procedure you're required to do that. So the day-to-day operations of the community obviously include those set forth in 720, which is our law that governs homeowners association, and also 617, which is the not-for-profit statute that governs not-for-profit corporations. Until I think it was the early maybe late 80s, early 90s, I can't remember exactly when, homeowners associations operated only under the not-for-profit statutes. And it seemed to be a good idea to expand and have its own statute and its own chapter. The difference between 718, which is a condo thing, is that in 718, don't forget, in a condominium, you're sharing walls, you're sharing different structures, and you really need to have a larger set of rules governing those type of things. My preference is in a homeowners association that really the declaration should be the law of the land, and 720 should just be an enhancement to that. I don't like to see 720 continually get expanded. The other thing that I would tell you is that there's no other area of your life that you operate using the statutes or quoting the statutes except in your homeowners association. You don't go into the grocery store with the statutes governing food operations, or you don't go into the bank with the statutes governing banking. I would tell you that you have professionals in place that should be able to help you stay within the parameters of the law. And, you know, although you have homeowners that will often quote 720 in part at a meeting, it's often the wrong part. It's a very intricate manner for determining how to integrate the law in your governing documents. I'll give you an example. In a community where I lived for many years, there was a provision in the declaration that said a homeowner could have a boat in their driveway for up to 48 hours, and they'd all say, well, the declaration says we can have a boat in our driveway for 48 hours, but they failed to read after the comma, which said, with the express written permission of the board of directors. So the problem is when you're trying to implement 720 or 617 even into your community day-to-day operations, very often if you don't understand or if you're not aware, you're not understanding how to integrate the provisions in the declaration with the provisions in the law. For instance, very often the law states that unless your governing documents provide otherwise, this is what you have to do. Or if it says, this is what you have to do. So at the first instance, we go back to the governing documents, and the second instance, we rely on the law. Yes?
I have a question. It's something we're going to be faced with because of the COVID crisis. We no longer do board meetings in this
Okay,
room.
I'm going to ask that we hold all questions because this will be 4 hours if we don't, but regarding COVID, your questions regarding COVID, and you want to know what your responsibilities are, or?
No,
okay.
it's much
Well, can
more-
we wait? Because we'll get there.
Sure,
Okay, let's hold the questions. I probably got you off track there by asking for questions, but honestly, it's better if I take 5 minutes after each section and we'll ask questions. So the main thing that you have to understand is that we all have different roles in the community. The board of directors is comprised of the officers and the directors, and the officers have as much authority, especially the president, as the board allots to the president. The president is the CEO of the corporation, and if you read your bylaws, it'll tell you what the president's responsibilities are and what their how far-reaching their authority is. And then again, it's tempered by what the board wants the president to have, how much authority the board wants the president to have. Now, in most communities, the president is the chair at all the meetings, and they're the liaison between management, board members, et cetera, and the association attorney. We either usually talk to the president or the manager, or at the direction of the president, a different board member. If the president says, oh, the treasurer needs to ask you a question, that's fine. But you certainly don't want to have a situation where you get your legal bills and you see director so-and-so on the bill, this one on the bill. You have to have some order here because you are actually responsible for running a corporation, and you have to remember that as much as you'd like to think of this as a big neighborhood community, your roles are a little bit different when you're on the board. You're just running the business of the corporation. Now, very often people get on the board and they think that's the opportunity for them to sit in the clubhouse with a sign that I'm on the board now, what's your issue? That's really not in the best interest of the corporation. You're here to run the business of the corporation. You are not here to acquiesce to the unit owners. We'll get into that a little bit later. Although you have a fiduciary duty to the unit owners, and I'm not saying that you don't. We'll explain that later. But the president has, as I said, as much authority as the board allows the president to have, but we do strongly recommend that the board president is the person communicating with the manager, et cetera. Now, I do have a sign-up sheet here because I know each one of you will want to have a half an hour with Carrie every single day. So, I'm kidding, Carrie. That was a joke. What? Huh? No, what, yeah, cut back the time now. No, what I would caution you of, it's very tempting for all of you to go into Carrie and give her all your great ideas. I'm going to tell you not to do that. This person here, who's your licensed community association manager, hopefully very receptive to the things that you want, but comes through the president. Or the treasurer if it's a financial matter. If you're all going into the office giving her direction, then she actually doesn't know what to do, and it makes it very confusing. The next officer would be the vice president. Who's the vice president? Frank, you can leave. No, I'm just kidding. The vice president steps into the president's role when the president's not available. What do I mean by not available? Well, if he's not at a meeting and somebody needs to chair the meeting, it may be the vice president that's selected to do that. In a community, years ago, I tell this story every time, we had the president on a cruise, and the vice president came into the office and said, I'm the president now. All those things that we said we were doing, we're not doing because I'm in charge. Well, that's not the role of the vice president. It's really, honestly, the board operates by board majority vote, and we'll talk about that also in detail later. The secretary. Everybody thinks that the secretary takes the minutes. Carrie, do you take the minutes, or the secretary does? Well, what I would suggest for the secretary is that you all know what your orders of business are during your meetings. I would write out the motions prior to the meeting and just have a fill in the blank. In corporate minutes, just so you all understand, they're not a reiteration of everything that happened at the meeting. Less is more in corporate minutes. And why do I say that? Because if you were around during the hurricanes of 2004 and 5, and then the subsequent insurance claims that resulted from that, these boards who gave these robust recall of every discussion in the minutes ended up causing issues with insurance claims. That's just one example. For instance, Mrs. Jones, back of the room, my window's leaking. Oh, Mrs. Jones' window's leaking. That's in the minutes. Never did the minutes reflect that Mrs. Jones' window was repaired. So then the insurance company used that line in the minutes to deny the claim for the water intrusion. So this is why we caution you. Every attorney will caution you of this. I don't know any that wouldn't. The minutes should be less than a page, merely reiterating the motion, the second, recalling the vote, and it should also give maybe just a brief synopsis of some of the discussions, but you got to be really, really precise and careful. And I was in a mediation for a Hurricane Wilma claim when the opposition started, for this board that I had warned over and over, started quoting things that they had published, things that were in the minutes, and I saw the whole board shrinking down in their seats, getting lower and lower, and when we caucused and separated, they all looked at me and said, I understand now. So regarding things like recording the meetings, sometimes people record the meetings, and they record them so that they can take the minutes. That tape should be re-recorded over or erased after the minutes are taken. It becomes part of the official record if you keep the recording, and we don't recommend that. There's nothing that is that important usually in a meeting that's not going to end up in the written minutes. I've been in situations where people have brought court reporters into the meeting, and I turn them around and say, you can't be here, and they go, the homeowner will say, well, it says I can record it. Yeah, with a recording device. You can't have a court reporter here. They're not a member of the association. We do this to protect the corporation. As you may or may not know, my role isn't as the board's attorney. My role is as the corporation's attorney. My role here is to make sure that you all have as much information as you need in order to not get the corporation in any trouble. And that's why I tell you the things that I tell you, because we've had these things happen. They're great examples, and you should take them with a grain of salt. The directors will serve in whatever capacity that the board decides that they serve in. And the treasurer obviously is not walking around with all of the bank accounts and the heavy-duty books and things like that. But the treasurer is the person that oversees what the management reports are, and also verifies those things, works with them on the budget, it reviews the reserve study. That's a great thing for a treasurer to do, and all the different things. And the treasurer and the president really have the most responsibility, and the secretary has responsibility, and is also the corporate secretary signing official documents. So when we do a bylaw amendment, we always want the corporate secretary to sign, as well as the president. That's why the president and the corporate secretary cannot be the same person. Next in the pecking order is your management team. You guys have a management team here. I'm assuming that you're very satisfied with them because they've been here a while. And you need to entrust them with their duties. That's why I made the joke about coming into Carrie's office for your half an hour every day, and then you said, why, you're cutting back on the time? But these people are here to do a job, and believe it or not, when you all think it's a good idea to go tell Carrie something, you're interrupting her day. I know what it's like for me in my office. I get a lot of phone calls all day long, and I take my phone calls all day long. I'm not one of those attorneys that says, I'll call you back later, correct? And if it's an emergency, Carrie knows how to get a hold of me immediately. Or if she's in the middle of a meeting and something happens, she knows how to get a hold of me immediately. So those things are important, but your manager is entrusted with the day-to-day operations. The board sets its policy, she enacts the policy, and she makes sure that the employees are doing what they're doing. Nothing could be worse than Carrie disciplining maybe an employee and then having the board come back and take the employee's side. That makes it very difficult for her to be seen as the leader of this team. Just she's your go-to person. If something fails on the operational side, it's because she hasn't gotten clear direction probably. And it's very difficult to do things when you're getting direction from 6 or 7 different people. And that's what you have to really try to caution yourself of. The only person that should be communicating on a day-to-day basis is the president when required. And when I was president of my association for 24 years, which was really ridiculous, I used to meet with my manager once a week for an hour, and that sufficed for me to get up to speed. I had a very capable manager. I was fortunate, etc. Next, I want you to rely on your financial and your legal consultants. When I say financial and legal consultants, I mean us and your CPA. I don't mean your management company who tells you what the law says, because they're not supposed to do that. I mean us. The buck stops here. Why do I tell you that? Well, there's a thing called personal responsibility, and personal responsibility you're absolved from personal liability is really what I want to say, if you rely on the advice of your professionals. When you all decide to sign a contract without having it reviewed by legal counsel, which you don't do, you guys are very good about that, but when an association signs a contract without having it reviewed by legal counsel, and there's something in that contract that's detrimental to the community or your business operation, you're going to cross a line of personal liability, and you don't want to do that. 617 is very clear. As long as you rely on the advice of your professionals, you're absolved from personal liability. I don't think anybody really is in a position to want to get to be in a position of incurring personal liability for your volunteer position. I think that would be a very important thing for you all to remember. Also, as you all know, because you've done it, and the ones that are familiar know that when you have an issue or a problem, I don't charge you guys to ask me a question. If I have to do work, read your documents, do a review of a contract, of course I'm going to charge for my time. But I encourage Carrie to call me up and say, what's the percentage vote that we need for XYZ? Because I'd rather, first of all, she's not supposed to be interpreting governing docs, nor are you, but it's faster and better, I think, for her to give me the opportunity to answer the question. The other thing that we've done for all of our communities, including yours, is we've given a one-page sheet, which you should share. Do you have that, Carrie? Where we give you the percentages for document amendments. We'll send it to you again. I've sent it to you a million times, but I'll send it again. What it does, it's a breakdown, not you necessarily, but we'll get it to you again. It's a breakdown of all the different things that you're required to conform with. Meeting notices, budget meeting notices. It talks about special assessments, what you have to do, all those different things, one page. Why do we do that? Well, I could look up and read your documents every time you ask me a question and charge you for it, or I could do a one-page, we call it a cheat sheet, where I've got all the information there, share it with you, plus I have it to go back to. So if I'm just referring to that piece of paper that I've already charged you maybe a nominal fee to do, I'm not going to charge you for answering the question or pointing someone in that direction of that piece of paper. So we'll make sure you all have that again.
You said that Terry should call you on a situation. None of us should have.
Well, no, I think the president should call me, actually. That's usually who our liaison is. She calls me for routine things, like I have a contract and we need an addendum, or how many days' notice do I have to give for a budget meeting. But if you have a concern that you think needs a little bit of discussion with me, you're planning a special assessment or something of that nature, and you want to discuss it with me beforehand, the best process or something like that. So you're going to do policy type things with me directly, and she's going to do routine types things with me. So we'll get a flow here. If you go back over my bills over the years, there's very little charges for discussing anything with anybody. And that's unusual too. Right, Carrie? Okay. Bids and contracts. It's very important that we go through the process properly. Again, as I told you, the biggest mistake that boards make is taking on the responsibility of entering into contracts without proper legal review. Boards sometimes don't take my advice when I give it to them, and that's not always a good thing, especially when we've given the advice and then you choose to act contrary to the advice. That's where we get into the situation of personal liability. We're just trying to protect you guys as board members, and we're also trying to establish the role that we have, which is we're the corporate counsel, okay? I often get a homeowner saying, well, you're my attorney because we pay your fee. No, I'm not your attorney. Oh, who are you, the board's attorney? No, I'm not the board's attorney either. I'm here for the corporation. My job is to make sure the corporation doesn't get in trouble. And we've done that. So it's been a good thing. Bids and contracts, obviously you have a manager who will go out and get bids for different projects. The worst thing that can happen is you have a meeting and you tell your manager to go out and get bids for a fence. And your manager goes out and meets with a couple different contractors. And please note this. This is very important. Multiple bids doesn't mean 3. It means more than 1. The problem with telling people to go out and get 3 bids for everything is, especially in landscaping, these landscapers are real tired of being the number 1 and number 2 bid, and they're getting tired of giving you bids because they know that they're just being used to fulfill a responsibility, right? So we recommend, really, if you have a contractor like your landscaper that you've dealt with for years and you're happy with him, just make sure that they're doing the job right. We don't think that you have to rebid that every year. The contract has a 30-day cancellation clause, which gives you the ability not to have to rebid it. And especially with landscaping, I've found personally that the best landscapers are the ones that have been there long term because they have a vested interest in the community a lot of times. They've watched the plants grow. They've seen the trees grow. Not saying you have to stay with your landscaper, but I'm just explaining that that's my, I don't look to replace people that are doing a good job. So bids are important, but make sure that when you instruct your manager to go out and get bids, this is what happened. Manager was asked to go out and get bids for a fence. She met with several contractors. She did a whole spreadsheet, a whole presentation. She gets to the next board meeting. She puts a presentation up. She's all ready to go over it with the board, and the one board member says, oh, don't bother, we've already selected somebody. Well, why hire a dog if you're going to do all the barking? right? I mean, you told her to do a job, stay out of it, get out of her way. After she brings you all the bids, certainly you're going to decide if you want to have her get more bids or you want to select one of the ones that she got. Or if you want to tell her before she goes out and does the job who you'd like her to ask. There may be a contractor that you're aware of that's good. So those kind of things. You know what? If you just continually remind yourself that you're here to run the business of the corporation, I think you'll make really good decisions. I think the problem is when board members get sidetracked and think that their reason for being is to acquiesce to the demands of the community. That's where we get in trouble. That's not what you're here for. It's similar to being parents with children. The parent is in charge. The children certainly have some leeway and some voice, but the parents make the decision. This is another example I give frequently. When I was in high school, my parents allowed me to fly to where my sister was in college. Before I left for the airport, my mother pulls me aside and she says, "Here's $50, don't tell your dad." Okay, won't tell him. Get in the car with my dad, taking me to the airport. "Here's $50, don't tell your mother." No problem. So here we have two parents giving both giving me money, which was great. But the problem is when you guys act independent of the board, and when I say independent of the board, you're walking down by the pool and somebody stops you and says, "I want to know about that contract," don't answer them. Worst thing you can do, because that person's going to not only ask you, they're going to ask all 7 board members, and they're going to get 7 different answers, and they're going to cause chaos within your organization. Your answer is, we as a board have a policy. We do not discuss board business outside of a meeting. If you have a concern, please put it in writing to the manager, and we'll bring it up at the next meeting. Don't try to answer them. You're in the grocery store, you're reaching for the gallon of milk, and somebody says, "Hey, you on the board, I want to know about this." What happens? Being on the board takes over your entire life. You have no life. You've got a manager. Tell them, look, if you have a problem in the community, tell the manager. If you have a problem in the manager, tell the board. All those people that are coming up to you, my neighbor, dog's on my property. That's between the neighbors, by the way. That's not your problem, okay? Your problems deal with whatever touches the common area. If the dog is off of their property on the common area, and I'm not talking about the sidewalk in front of their house, I'm talking about over here at the pool, then you have to get involved. You want to try to be careful what you get yourselves involved in. I had a situation where one of the communities where I was president of the Master Association decided that they would get into a battle with a homeowner who had a security light shining into the other guy's backyard. And they spent $10,000 or $15,000 in legal fees fighting this fight for the neighbor. And they said, "What do we do?" I'm like, "What do you do? Why'd you get in the middle of it?" The security light from the guy's house going into the other guy's house was between those two guys, right? That's where you leave it. So try to keep reminding yourself, because it's difficult. First of all, you all are very nice people and you want to help people. That's why you're on the board. And you want to protect your investment. Agreed. But try to remember that if it doesn't touch the common area, or if it's not part of the business of the corporation itself, remove yourself from that conversation and direct everybody to the manager first. She's capable. She can handle it. You're not required to rebid several different areas of your existence here. One of the oddest ones in the law is you're not required to rebid your landscape architect services. I don't really know how many of you have hired a landscape architect lately, but they must have an extremely strong lobbyist in order to get on this list. It's not your landscapers, it's a landscape architect. All right. Accountants, you're not required to rebid. Architects, attorneys, community association managers, engineering, or landscape architect services. I'll tell you with your attorney, there's no contract with us. We serve at the pleasure of the board. If you don't like us, get a new attorney. I don't recommend it because I think I'm the best, but And I love you guys anyway. But anyways, as long as the landscape contract and your management contract has a termination clause, with or without cause, you're fine. You don't have to rebid that. Honestly, the biggest upset you can do to your community, because you've done it a couple times, is to change management companies, because you know the disruption that causes. Everybody's got to send their bills a different place and all the different things. So I always tell my communities that really the most important person, as long as your association management company is doing your financials properly, and Andre, that would be your responsibility to make sure that they are, and if they aren't, bring it to their attention, and then bring it to the board's attention if it's not fixable. I lost my train of thought. Oh boy. Where was I? I said the management contract. Okay, yeah, this is important. The most important person in your management company is the person that sits in your front office here. Carrie, obviously. As long as that person's doing a good job, you can probably fix all the other things that the management company may not be doing exactly as you like. But if you don't have a strong manager, you really have nothing going for you. And I think you're lucky now. I think you do have a strong manager. Just remember that when we have a board meeting, we're going to get into the board meeting stuff. The president usually prepares the agenda, and it's sent out to the board members in advance, just in case they have anything that they'd like to suggest be added to the agenda. The chairman is usually the president who calls the meeting to order. And obviously, the first order of business is ratifying the board minutes of the last meeting. Hopefully, they're short, because I just told you why they should be, so you can do that quickly. 9 times out of 10, you waive reading. You are required by 720 to have an open forum for your residents. There's many ways that you can do this. This is pursuant to the board's preference. Boards should have a policy for member communication. I don't know how you exactly do it here. One of the ways that we found that allows the meeting to move along in a more efficient manner is when the board goes through each agenda item, doesn't do their vote yet. So let's say you're looking at a landscape contract. You guys have I'm using landscape, I'm just using that as an example. You guys all have your discussion about the landscape contract. You ask all your questions of each other or Carrie or whoever's presenting, and then you hold the vote on that item. Then you go to the next item. Maybe it's refurbishing of the cabanas. I don't know. And so you discuss that issue. And then the next issue. All the issues, you don't do the vote. I recommend that you go through all your discussion, hold all discussion like I did here today, from the audience, and then, before you actually vote, give everybody their opportunity to address the agenda items. It's much more orderly that way. You'll find it's much more efficient, and once your residents get used to it, they actually appreciate it, because then they get the whole picture without interruption as well. So then you get the comments from the residents, and then you go through the motions, which hopefully have already been written out. Somebody makes the motion, somebody makes the second, the secretary records the vote, and you move on. That, in my opinion, I've been at meetings that they don't do it that way, that last 3.5 hours, and I've asked them to allow me to help them do it that way at the next meeting, and the meeting maybe lasts 40 minutes. And everybody leaves with a much better attitude because they're not stressed out about all the interruptions. Just a suggestion. You guys can do what's best for all of you. I'm sure that you're prepared a board meeting package before the meeting. My suggestion is that you look at it before the meeting. Very often people are paging through it during the meeting. Not only is that distracting, but you are not familiar enough with the items that are coming forward. Another method for getting you guys up to speed is for the president, who's worked on the agenda and knows what the items are and probably has a little more familiarity with what's going to be discussed at the meeting. If there's an item that's complex, complicated, new, you may want to take the time to individually speak to the board members. I don't recommend that you try to do it en masse. When I was president of my association, I was fortunate. I had 5 board members, very supportive. But whenever we had something that was coming up that was new or unusual, I spent 10 minutes with each board member, bringing them up to speed before the meeting via phone. We never did email. Email's dangerous. I can tell you that when we're hired by an association and the board members are not getting along, the first thing I ask them to do is share their emails with each other. Very often you're going to get that 2 o'clock in the morning email from somebody who woke up and is still aggravated at what happened at the meeting, and they say all kinds of things in that email that they would never say to your face. And it's a shame, because not only do they maybe say things that they wouldn't say to your face, you may take the things that they said differently than they intended them to be taken. You each have your own personalities and your own qualms, so you bring that into this email and you're reading it and the inflection changes. I didn't like what you said at the meeting. I didn't like what you said at the meeting. You know, 2 different things. Or you made me uncomfortable at the meeting. You made me uncomfortable at that meeting. You know, I had a friend, 20 years, friendship, it's 30 now or more. When email first started, she and I emailed each other about some issue. She was actually on the board. This is why I stopped all board communication via email, too. And it went back and forth with her and I, and we didn't speak to each other for 6 months over these emails. We were so mad at each other. And then we made up. And about 2 years later, I ran across these emails, and I reread them, and I'm like, I got mad at that? They really weren't bad. It was the heat of the moment, the way I was feeling. Now, the other thing, I know you all have your BV blah, blah, blah emails. That's wrong, in my opinion. You all shouldn't be communicating directly with homeowners. There should be an avenue for them to communicate, but it should be through the manager. They're emailing you guys individually. Again, the same thing getting stopped in the grocery store. That is the worst thing you can do. The worst thing that you can do. That is not your role here. Your role isn't to hear all the griping. Your manager should hear all the griping. She gets paid to hear the griping, unfortunately. You guys don't. I mean, last time I looked at your paychecks, they weren't that big, right? And also, you want to be able to separate yourself from being a board member and being a neighbor. The worst thing that happens when you're on the board is people look at you in a different light and they treat you differently. I can assure you they don't like you more because you're now on the board, right? So what I like to have you understand is that your role as a board member is when you're at the board meeting. When the board meeting's over, the board makes a decision, they vote on it. Whether you voted yes or no doesn't matter. The majority made a decision. That is your mantra going forward. You're not supposed to go out in the community and say, well, I voted no for that, and I knew better than the rest of them. You're supposed to say, first of all, back to we as a board have a policy, we don't discuss board business outside of a meeting. But do remember, once the vote's taken, it doesn't matter what you thought at that moment. You got your opportunity to share your ideas and your reasons for voting differently and feeling differently. Once the parents make the decision, they have to present a united front. The board made the decision, it's over. You know, this is what we're doing. It was a board decision. It was taken at a meeting. Thank you for your concern. Remember that, because that's what will allow you to be invited to a cocktail party and not have to spend the whole night talking about what color they painted the bathrooms in the clubhouse. Because not everyone's going to like the same color, right? Please understand, I'm a board member at the board meeting. I'm your neighbor when I'm not at the board meeting. I had to literally sell my house and move out of that community where I was president for 24 years because it was really bad. I couldn't go anywhere without people accosting me, even with my great answers that I gave them, but I'd been on the board so long. In my new community, when we moved to Martin County, my husband wanted to move, and he said, will you move up there with me? One condition. What's the condition? Don't put my name on the deed. What do you mean you don't want your name on the deed? I said, I'll go to one meeting, I'll end up president, I'll never get off the board. Literally for 10 years, first 10 years I lived in Hope Sound, my name wasn't on the deed of the house. When we did turnover there, they all came to me. You should be on the board. Oh, I can't, not a homeowner. So when we moved to our next house, I am on that deed, but it's a small community of 28 people, and I said, I'll do all your legal work for free as long as you never ask me to be on the board. So that's the arrangement that we have. Again, you need to have policies in place for controlling the resident forum in your meetings so that you have some continuity to your meetings. I haven't been at any of your meetings in a long time. I remember back in the day they were a little crazy, but I think they've calmed down, I hope. You guys, you're very fortunate, and I don't mean to continually reference your manager, but I really feel that you're very fortunate that you have a strong manager. You haven't really had one, I think. Bob, what do you think? I mean, it's been tough, right, with your personnel? So you're very lucky. She's very committed to you guys. She has the same warm, fuzzy feelings about this community that I do, which I do. You know, this community is very near and dear to me as your attorney. You guys go beyond being a client. I have a vested interest in all of your success. You know, I care about your community. And I think that when you look at your bills, and I have to relate it back to that, you will see that I'm not coming from the standpoint of looking at you all as billable hours. I'm coming from the standpoint of assisting you, being a member of your team, and helping you all to be successful. And I will tell you, if every board member, especially the newer ones, would take a step back and understand all the things that I'm throwing at you today, it's a lot, but this is really important to the success of the community and your success as a board member and your ability to coexist with your neighbors even though you're on the board. You know, everybody has an opinion at times, but not always are those opinions correct. And you kind of want to keep yourself out of that fray of being the person that runs out to the community and says, they did this wrong and they did that wrong. That's not good. That's not a good thing. You're actually hurting the corporation when you do that, and you're breaching your fiduciary duty to the corporation. So please understand, it's not that we don't want you to have an opinion. We want your opinion where it's required to be given, and that's at the board meetings. After the board meetings, nobody has any opinions anymore. It's board vote, move on. And you guys have gone through evolutions here. You've had situations and times when the president ran everything and nobody else said anything. And you've evolved into a different sort of a structure. There's nothing wrong with that. As I said at the beginning, the board decides how much authority each person has. You know, so that's all good. Budgets, reserves, and financial reporting. Luckily, you have Andre. He's a very smart guy, and he understands the financials, so he keeps a good eye on Castle. I don't get in a lot of this. Your budgets are done prior to the coupon books going out, and it's all done based on what you've spent in the past and the projects in the future. I don't know if this comes up later, but I'll bring it up now. One of the things I like to do at after the annual meeting, when you all do your organizational meeting, is I have given every association this, whether they choose to do it or not, it's their prerogative. But I give them an outline. I don't want you at your organizational meeting merely just to say, he's president, he's vice president, secretary, treasurer, move on. I want you to take a look at what your plans are for the community for the upcoming term. What projects do we want to get completed? Prioritize those projects. Develop a mission statement. This is what our mantra is for the year coming. You know, determine what roles each board member has. All those different things. It's a little bit more complex than just merely saying president, vice president, secretary, treasurer. And that's something that evolves over time, the ability to be able to come up with that kind of a plan. It also evolves more easily when we have board members that are long-term. And the newer board members can take a page out of the book of the older board members, because if they've managed to be able to tolerate being on the board for many years, they've got a lot of knowledge which you should rely on. You know, you shouldn't discount them because they've been on the board a lot of years. They got a lot of history here. So you should understand that. So budgets is something that you guys are involved in after your management company presents you with all the data from the last year. one of the worst things that you can do is rely on the data from the management, and maybe Bob was on the board, I don't know. You can't rely on the numbers from the management company until your auditor has finished the audit. Because sometimes they're doing a bookkeeping type of thing, where your auditor goes in and makes sure that they put everything in the right pot at the end of the year. Sometimes there's a situation where a board may think that they have excess monies that they don't really have, because they relied on the management report, which isn't flawed, it's just showing it in a different light, instead of waiting for the audit. And they've gotten themselves into trouble because they've revised the budget based on a surplus that they didn't actually have. So we caution you as to make sure that you budget properly, on the err on the side of caution. The other thing I would tell you is that a budget's just a guesstimate of what your future expenses are. So you're going to have all these line items. And maybe you, at the end of the year, will look back and say, well, we spent $3,000 in repairs and we budgeted $6,000, and we spent $6,000 in something else and we only budgeted $3,000. We failed. No, you didn't. Bottom line is, a successful budget at the end of the year, other than a couple of months of surplus in the operating account for bills, will be zero. You'll be as close to zero as possible. You want to spend as much money as you collect. Does that mean you spend it out in the world? No. Your reserves, all those different things. So your budget, you want it to be as close to zero at the end of the year as you can get. It doesn't matter if you budgeted $20,000 in one line item that you spent $10,000 on, and $10,000 in another line item that you spent $20,000 on. That's all semantics. At the end of the day, the closer you are to zero. Now, obviously, you can make those adjustments for the following year, and that's not a bad thing. But I'm just telling you that at the bottom line is, closest to zero as you can get at the end of the year, the successful budget that you have. You're a not-for-profit corporation. You're not supposed to have a surplus of monies. You're not supposed to collect more money from your residents. You're in a type of a community where you can afford to ask your residents for money if something comes up that's unexpected that you weren't anticipating, whereas some of the different communities may have to have everything worked into their budget because the people can't afford a contingency if it comes up. Or we have communities that don't want any, they want you to ask them for money every time they need it. A lot of the condos waive reserves every year. In my opinion, they should have some reserves, because most of those condos, especially the ones on the ocean, are doing these concrete restoration projects. And I will tell you, pay me now or pay me later. I've got a condominium who neglected the building. We just started representing them about a year ago, and got in the middle of their concrete restoration project. They did all the budgeting, did all the engineering studies, got their loan for $5 million. Well, if anybody knows anything about condominiums, once you start chipping away at that concrete, you find a whole lot of stuff that you didn't know about. $15 million. And it's horrid. It's like $150,000 a unit. There's only 94 units. They've never reserved. They never did the concrete restoration over the years. They didn't do preventive maintenance. You guys have all kinds of schedules here. I know you do. I've seen them, where you maintain your infrastructure. It's a great thing that you do that, because you actually have an idea of what things are going to cost, and that's why you're able to look at the reserve study and say, some of this might not be right. Now, I will tell you that years ago, you'd get a reserve study when you hired, they didn't have these companies that do it. And I think these companies sometimes that do it make it more complicated than it needs to be. Years ago, we used to get an engineer to come into the community and do a life, useful life left, actual replacement cost, and all that kind of stuff. Then we took that for the components that we needed to reserve for, and we would adjust it through either asking our professionals who do the work, or by the knowledge of the board members. Maybe we got a board member that was in roofing, and he can tell you that today the roof will cost 10% more than we budgeted, so let's adjust the reserves for that. Things like that. So you can do that. these reserve studies, I just saw one where this little condo of 104, I'd say condo, it could be an HOA too. It just happens to be this one was a condo. It's the same, except that HOA reserves are not statutory, and you all know about that if you've been on the board for a while. We'll talk about that. But anyways, they told them that they needed to budget $370,000 a year. These are condos that are selling for $50,000, $75,000. And they're telling them that they are way behind. Well, they sent me the reserve study. They've got light bulbs. They've got ridiculous things built into this study. And I'm like, guys, you have to reserve things that have replacement cost of more than $10,000. That's what the statute says in condos. And this stuff that they're telling you to reserve for, tires on the golf cart, I mean, ridiculous stuff. I'm exaggerating a little bit. So I had to go through that reserve study, and I had to tell them either we have to do a reserve study again with a company that's going to do it properly, or we have to try to figure this out on our own. And that's where we're at right now. Really, they probably should be budgeting about $150,000 for reserves. That would be more reasonable. So you guys have been smart. You've done great jobs with your budgeting and your reserves, and you have to be commended, and also the poster children of that, really. And you've been very good about understanding statutory reserves in a homeowners association. Back in the 2005-06, we refer to that often, during the hurricanes, a lot of HOA residents were getting hit with very large assessments because these HOAs never had any reserves, and they were angry. And the legislature, who doesn't always do things practically, they do things that they think are good, but they've never really had to deal with it, put a provision in the law that says if the developer funded reserves, or if the membership voted to force the board to have reserves, those are now statutory reserves. Well, number one, back in the day, developers would put the word reserves on the financials, but they never funded them. The other problem that I've had to explain to different accountants, believe it or not, is that the law goes forward. It doesn't go backwards. So when this law was passed in 2008, and it said that homeowners association members can force the board to have reserves, or if the developer funded reserves, those reserves are statutory. That was for going forward. So even if a developer in 1998 had funded the reserves, which was rare, they still weren't statutory because that was done before the law changed. There's where your attorney comes in. We can tell you when it's prospective or going backwards. A big one was there was a big issue over term limits because they put some stuff in the legislation for term limits, and everybody thought it went backwards and you had to count the number of years somebody was on the board. It doesn't. It started when the law changed. So similar to any of you that have lived in Palm Beach County for a long time, we have term limits for our county commissioners. And when that was instituted and voted on by the residents of Palm Beach County, the current commissioners were allowed to serve 2 more terms, even if they'd served 20 before. So it was going forward. Same thing in your association when the law changes. So we had a situation years ago, and Bob, I don't remember if you were involved in these discussions or not, where we had to really temper you not to have your reserves cross the line and become statutory reserves. They wanted to put things in the documents that said that the membership could vote if this changed. Well, if you've got the membership voting on reserves, guess what? Then always they have to vote. The situation is in a homeowners association different than a condo. Condos are shared walls and concrete restoration. They should have statutory reserves. You guys have private property. You're not reserving anything for your homes except for your painting, right? Well, you're collecting that when you paint, right? You don't do the roofs. Oh, you do the roofs? So that should be reserved. Is that? Oh, you don't replace them. Okay. So whatever. Some places do replace the roofs. But anything, most of your items that you would reserve for don't touch personal property, unlike a condo. So that's why it's different in condos than it is in HOAs. And you've done a great job of making sure that you've retained that ability not to have statutory reserves. And you've been very fiscally responsible, extremely fiscal. You're very, I have to say, one of the most fiscally responsible communities that we represent. So, and that goes way back. Again, I talked about income, budget versus actual. You're required to do different levels of financial statements for your community based on your budget. You guys probably are in the audit level. You're over 500,000. And again, the reserve study. It's a great tool when you get a reserve study if it's done properly. If it's not done properly, it will haunt you, it will destroy you, it will make you crazy. So I would tell you that anything that is in the reserves should merely be things for which you have to extend the useful life for. Your pool resurfacing should be in your reserves. You know, any kind of major stuff that needs replacement. You went through a paver project recently. Stuff like that. Painting of the common areas. You can reserve for that. Kind of, even though you're an HOA, use the condo model. Anything that costs more than $10,000 to replace, you might want to consider reserving for, but it may not be necessary. You know, because $10,000 in your community, 449 residents, and it's probably something that you can work out. You have to, you know what, use common sense when you look at your reserve study. Don't take it as law. It's not the law. Don't take it as the last word. You guys all have different areas of expertise. You can take a look at that reserve study and logically come up with what you really need. I always have a fear when I see a community with several $1 million in reserves. Because in reality, your residents can make more money on their money than you can make. And most of them would say, hey, don't make me give you all this money up front that you might use 20 years from now. Ask me for it when you need it, if it's for something unusual. You know, what I'm trying to say here is don't try to think of every possible thing that might need to be done. Just do the big stuff. You know, stuff that's going to be well known that you're going to have to do, like pool remarciting or whatever they call it today. Diamond Bright. What do they call it? Diamond Bright. All those kind of things. You know, refurbishment of this room. You know, this room has a useful life. You know, the carpet's going to last so long, the decorations are going to last so long, etc. So use common sense when you come up with your reserves, etc. You guys have your elections once a year. I believe they're in December. And you operate your elections very similar to the condo method. It makes it much more efficient in that we're not getting nominations from the floor the night of the meeting and trying to decide who's running and filling out the ballots and having 449 people vote that night. You are afforded the opportunity of being able to submit your ballot prior to the meeting, and there's a whole process for which the envelopes are reviewed and et cetera, and your management team does that, and I'm sure you select owners at the meeting to count the votes and things like that. Your bylaws is what controls how your meetings are conducted. There is one anomaly here, and it's unfortunate that we didn't catch it years ago. It just slipped right by us. In your declaration, you have a provision that says every unit must select a voting member. It's so cumbersome to do that. Now, let me explain something to you. The voting member is usually only required when you have a corporation that owns a unit. You select which corporate officer is going to do the voting. When it's a married couple, they either decide amongst themselves, or if they can't, then they don't vote. If it's two individuals, they should be able to decide amongst themselves who submits the vote. If they can't, then they don't vote. Having all of your membership have to have a voting certificate. Now, Carrie, I don't know how you do this, but I'm going to tell you the biggest mistake that communities make is when they send out those voting certificates. Those voting certificates should be completed at the time of the sale. Good. They're put in a book. you forget them. If John and Jerry decide they want to have Jerry be the voting member instead of John, they need to come to Carrie and tell her we're going to submit a new voting certificate. The biggest mistake that's made in voting packages is that people send out voting certificates every time they send out the ballots. It's like, hello, where's the book? Crazy. Right, and I had a community in Boynton, homeowners association, crazy voting member thing. It's crazy how they do it there. But I created 10 books, because there's 1,000 units there, by address. I actually had to go to public record and recreate the roster because it had gotten so, they were with a different management company, not yours. But the roster had gotten so convoluted and wrong that I had to go back to the property appraiser and recreate their roster. And then what I do, and Carrie probably does it similar, is I had a book with every resident had a page. And on that page, it said if they required a voting certificate, and I did it in a different color. Once you get that voting certificate, you slide it in front of that page, and you know you have it. If it's not there, you got a big red thing saying voting certificate required. And the biggest mistake everybody makes is they send out new voting certificates as a course of business with every election. It's ridiculous. It's not the way to do it. We're opening ballots and voting certificates are popping out. It's like, hello, you can't do that. You use the voting certificates when they're checking in or when you're checking the envelope. So you guys do it right. That's a great thing. Yes, sir. Okay, nice to see you, Frank. Have a great day. We just did your bylaws over, and we put in there that you could do voting electronically. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of companies that do it. We could move to that someday, and Carrie, if you ever want to, we could look into it. It might solve things with COVID. Speaking of COVID, we've had a lot of ins and outs that we've had to adjust to because of COVID. I know that there's dozens and dozens of attorneys who are having webinars constantly, and I was very concerned about that because anything that we do as attorneys has to be approved by the Florida Bar. And I'm like, how are these people getting all this stuff approved by the Florida Bar? 9 times out of 10, the stuff they're telling you is wrong. One of the first legal journals that I read after COVID, which I never read legal journals, and I got this legal journal, made me open it for some reason, and in that it talked about all the attorneys that are going to get sued for malpractice for giving medical advice to residents. They're not in that arena. They shouldn't be doing it. Management company officers who are in a cave, I always say they're in a cave somewhere making all these manifestos about what to do with COVID. I don't know how they have this much time to, and half the stuff they say is wrong. They talk about HIPAA. You're not bound by HIPAA. That's a medical doctor that's bound by HIPAA, a medical office. There's no HIPAA in an HOA. Of course, we want to be respectful of people's privacy. I agree with that. But there's no HIPAA rules that you're going to violate. You're not bound by HIPAA. So the problem is that all of this stuff with COVID has been very new. So I called the bar. I said, why aren't these attorneys, how are they getting these webinars approved this quickly? I called the department, the advertising, get a recording. Due to COVID, we've suspended all regulation regarding advertising. In other words, go do whatever you want. And they did. It was frustrating for us. I mean, we're very logical in our firm. All 3 of the lawyers there are very logical, very precise. We didn't give you guys medical advice. We told you what you could do under the parameters of the law regarding the things that you had to concern yourself with, but we didn't tell you how to tell somebody to avoid getting sick. That's not your responsibility. So what we did tell you was, I think you have it posted right there, follow the CDC guidelines. That's who's giving you the best authority on how to handle all these things. Now, we've had to zig and zag with our meetings. We've been doing a lot of Zoom meetings. They're kind of fun. I kind of resisted at first, but it's actually a great opportunity to get to know different boards that I may not have gotten to talk to without driving there. So it's been a good thing, some of the things that have evolved from COVID. But you all have had to make adjustments too. How do you conduct a board meeting? Well, you're doing them by Zoom? Yeah, great. How do you conduct an election? Can you waiver from what your bylaws say as to the date, time, and place? Well, I have an association who has to have their meeting, it says in their bylaws, 8 p.m., second Tuesday in February, 8 p.m. They called me up. They said, look, we want to do the meeting outside, and we want to do it at 3 p.m. Can we do that? Well, technically, no. If your bylaws say you have to have it at 8 p.m., you have to have it at 8 p.m. But I said to them, go ahead and have it at 3 p.m. because you're looking out for the health interests of your residents. You want to be able to do it in the open air outside, and I'll defend you if somebody tells you that you couldn't do that. Yes, I would tell you that that's okay. Is it an emergency power? You can call it an emergency power. They've quoted it at all these webinars. Oh, your emergency powers, you can do this. Read the emergency powers. It's about a storm. It's about a hurricane. Doesn't have a thing to do with COVID. They want to, let me tell you, back to what I told you at the beginning. Use your common sense. It's not going to fail you. If your gut tells you it's okay, I'm going to guess it's probably okay. I have a question. Richard.
Can you take a question on voting?
Yes.
So we're doing Zoom and regular stuff. A number of our committees are preparing proposals for spending a lot of money on various projects. And normally it will be up to the vote of the residents to decide if they want to do that.
Things over 20, okay. So your question involves things that the community needs to vote on in order to spend money. For in this example, it'd be if it's over $25,000, correct?
As an example.
Yeah, non-reserved item, unexpected.
And up to now, we've always been a little bit worried about the ebb and flow of the snowbirds. And everybody struggles to get everything done by March or April while the snowbirds are still here. And we're saying, but now that we're using Zoom, and people are used to, can they vote by Zoom even when they're back up north?
Well,
And we don't have to worry
no.
about doing that.
No, because you have to vote in writing. You can't vote by Zoom. You can attend the meeting by Zoom and hear the information, but the actual vote is done on a piece of paper. And let me caution you. When you vote on things, first of all, I have never, ever had a member of a community say, I want to see how everybody voted in that matter. Ever. Nobody's ever come to our office or to the manager's office and said, I want to see all the ballots, ever. Sometimes you all worry about, oh, if I vote this way, somebody might know I voted that way. I'm going to tell you, in the history of time, nobody's ever asked to see them. Now it's going to happen tomorrow because I said that. But when you vote for this expenditure of funds that your documents require you to vote on, you have to have a written vote from your membership, so there's no Zoom voting. Electronic voting that we talked about earlier can be done in an election. It cannot be done for other than an election. So you're going to always have to send out a physical vote to your membership and have them return that to you.
Well, we could send it up north if we have.
You send it wherever they are. You send it to their mailing address, correct? Yeah.
With our annual meeting, approving, the year before minutes, we said, anyone that's seen the raise their hand.
Correct.
That's the only thing.
Correct. And you're an unusual community in that you have a quorum for your annual meeting. Most communities don't. Most communities never have an annual meeting. Now, in some communities, the documents either say, or the law in condos, provided you get X number of ballots, you don't need a quorum to proceed with your voting. But in homeowners associations, the biggest problem was boards would roll continually because they never got enough people at the meeting to vote. They never had a quorum. So that law was changed in 720. And 720 now says when you don't have a quorum of the members, you can still seat the new board that's running, provided that there's not more members running than there are seats. So let's say you have 5 current board members and 5 people running for the board. Some of them may be the current board or they may be new people. As long as it's 5 members and 5 running, these guys are seated even if there's not a quorum, which you guys don't have that problem. But if you have 6 people running or 4 people running, the old board still rolls. So it's a very interesting evolving of the 720 in order to allow communities not to get stuck with apathy of the community and not being able to elect a new board, because that's what happens. I mean, I used to circulate a recall to get me recalled off the board, and nobody would sign it. I couldn't get off the board, not only because they liked what I was doing, but because there wasn't an interest. People didn't want to do what I did, and I did a lot. You know, it was a lot. You all know what it's like to be on the board. And even if you're not the president, you still have things that the board's assigned you as your duty. You know, it keeps you busy. So it's nice here because you have very actively involved people. Sometimes it's nice, right? Sometimes it's not. But most of the time it's a good thing. And you have a very, in my opinion, you've done a great job of doing what you do. So, did I answer your question? You wanted to know, yeah, so you have to vote in writing. So again, I'm going to,
Well, one last question. In the cheat sheet you're gonna send Terry, does it talk about if we send out notices that we want you to vote on this proposal and we mail it to the address that you're supposed to be at, is there a required minimum number of responses you must have?
oh yes, there would
Is that
be.
on the cheat sheet?
Yeah.
Okay, then
Mhm.
I don't have to ask the question.
Okay.
And later at the end, we'll ask a question about that sort of thing.
Oh, don't ask me specific because I don't have your documents with me.
No, you'll.
Okay. All right. Again, we talked briefly about emails. I told you why it's not a good idea for you guys to email each other. The only emails that should be going back and forth between Carrie and you guys is the meeting's Tuesday, here's your board package. You know, the pool's going to be closed on Thursday for refurbishing, things like that. Housekeeping matters. When you guys say, what do y'all think about this? Well, you're actually having a meeting without notice because you're discussing it. You're going to tell me, but we're not really voting. Well, you're having a discussion that's required to be had in front of the community. The worst thing the legislature did was they put in some language into 720 that says you can communicate via email, but they didn't explain it. You can communicate via email regarding housekeeping matters. You're not supposed to be talking about board business in an email. That's the whole purpose of what the law says and what your governing documents say, not the Sunshine Law. That's for government officials. You're not bound by the Sunshine Law. You're bound by the corporate law that requires that all of your meetings are conducted in public with the ability for your residents to attend, unless it's a legal meeting about proposed or threatened litigation or a true personnel matter. Now, some communities have personnel meetings that really aren't personnel meetings. Discussing how management contracts are operating is not a personnel meeting. Discussing the maintenance man falling asleep in the tool shed is a personnel matter. That's something you can have a meeting about. I know there's certain, do you still do that? Well, that's different. That's different. That's specifically related to an employee. It's not specifically related to the management contract in general. Again, I would tell you to try to communicate in kindness. It's sometimes difficult to do. I was at my own homeowners meeting, 28 people, and the guy who, we take turns, they take turns being board members, right? 3 people. The guy who's the board member this year has a meeting, and we all walk in, and he says, nobody can talk. I'm the only one that can talk. I don't care what anybody has to say about this. And I was actually the committee person that had the information that we were discussing, and I tried to bring forward a little bit later the information that I had. And he said, shut up and sit down. Well, any of you that know me well know that I lasted about 3 minutes in that room, said some choice things and left. Well, the best part about it is 2/3 of the people that were there walked out with me. So, you know, it's communicate with kindness. That's what I'm trying to tell you. You guys know the inner workings of everything that you do. You're more familiar with it. So very often a resident will stand up and they'll ask a question that was just asked. And you're like, really? Guess why they did that? The whole time they're waiting to be called on, they're going over their question in their head. They're not listening to what anybody else is asking. So very kindly, just say, as we said to so-and-so, we'll repeat. Quick, short, sweet. Again, board member liaison. Most important thing I can tell you. Trying to have 7 board members go tell the landscaper which tree to cut down is ridiculous. Trying to have 7 board members go into the management office every day just to shoot the crap with your manager is a waste of her resources. She's not going to get her job done. She's going to leave here frustrated. She's going to get stressed out, and she'll probably end up quitting. So you don't want that to happen. Trust me when I tell you, you as a board member have something you want to get to the manager, you really should take that through the president or whoever the board appoints as a liaison. All of you have great ideas, but none of them matter if it's not the board's idea. The only things that matter before you are the things that are brought before the board and are things that the board as a group decides to do or not do. Once it's discussed, let it go. Don't go out and tell Joe Smith how stupid the other 6 board members are. I'm not saying that everybody has all the answers, but you need to just let the board operate as a corporation's board operates. Get your personalities out of it. Get your personal feelings out of it. Remove yourself from the neighborhood when you're on the board, and remove yourself from the board when you're in the neighborhood. Best advice I could give you. There's a gal in our community who's been the secretary of it forever. It's 28 homes, right? The poor girl can't walk her dog without people coming after her. And what we've done is tried to re-educate through this process the members as to the proper forum for conversation about the community matters. That's it. Again, resident has a concern. The concern is given to the manager in writing. The president is advised of the concern. A decision is made as to whether or not it ends up on it's significant enough to end up on the agenda, and you move on. You discuss it at the meeting, you take a vote of the board, and once you leave that room, it's the board's decision. Please, trust me on that one. Anybody that's been on the board in a corporation knows that if you were to walk out of your corporate meeting at GM and say that the board didn't know what the hell they were talking about, I can assure you, you're going to get in trouble, right? So, you know, everybody doesn't have to assemble to change a light bulb on a board. The whole board doesn't need to get together to talk about changing a light bulb. That's why we have a liaison to the manager, a liaison to the landscaper, a liaison to everybody, so that everybody knows their roles. So I don't know who the liaison to the landscaping is. Bob? So Bob, you got a concern that's shared to you by Andre or another member. Hey, the grass over in this section of the community looks bad. Can you check out why? You go to the landscaper and you say, hey, first of all, you'll go to Carrie, obviously, but if you have a conversation with the landscaper, you're going to have that conversation about the grass in the area that's been identified to you. The problem is if all of you are going to the landscaper, all of you are going to have a different perception of where the problem is, and the landscaper's going to start pulling his hair out, if he has any. I don't know. Does he have any? Okay. All right. Again, keep your board meetings, dispute resolution is what we're talking about now. Keep your board meetings concise, keep on task, try to limit your resident forum to one period of time. I think that works better. Obviously, we want the residents to limit their speaking time. We don't want them standing up for 25 minutes. I mean, if they speak for 4 minutes, okay, you know, whatever. But if it starts to get long, somebody's got to have, okay, point of order, we just need to move on. Thank you for your concerns. You want to make sure that a resident or a topic doesn't monopolize the meeting. You're here to conduct business. Again, we talk about at times the board will be approached to resolve issues between neighbors. Stay out of it. If it doesn't touch the common area, it's not your concern, unless it's something that is your concern. One of the things that I could tell you in summary is to be proactive, listen first. Very often, somebody approaches us and starts to talk, and we think we know what they're talking about, and we cut them off. Well, very often we're wrong. So sometimes if you can just remind yourself, just wait until they're finished, as long as they're not going on for 35 minutes. Give them an opportunity to kind of give you the gist of what they're concerned about. Then you want to negotiate an appropriate time or place. What do I mean by that? If it's something that concerns you as a neighbor, you want to settle it right then and there. If it's something that concerns the community and it's a board issue, you want to advise them to bring it to the manager or the other appropriate person. And she'll decide or alert you as to the issue, and you guys decide the time and place to discuss it, usually at a board meeting. Maybe there was an issue with an employee. Maybe somebody comes up to you and says, this employee was rude to me. That goes to Carrie. There's where you have your personnel meeting. So you got to kind of play this game all the time in your head of when do we talk, when don't we talk. It's not that I don't want you to be friendly or talk to your neighbors or be approachable. I just want you to understand that if you're not speaking one voice, you're going to have a lot of confusion. Be the subject matter expert. Don't make it personal. A lot of times when somebody says something to a person, they think they're relating it to something that you've done, I've done, you know, instead of listening. They may say that the landscapers going on somebody's lawn and performing tasks for no charge for that person. And you say, the landscaper would never do that in my yard. Well, they didn't say they did it in your yard. You got to really listen to what people are saying. Sometimes we don't listen, and that's really where the biggest problems happen. Know when to solicit the assistance of professionals, your management company, your auditors, your legal consultant. Please understand that our goal in our firm, and it's always been our goal in our firm, is to be a part of your team to help you guys be successful. We're not here to toot our own horns. We're not here to look awesome and great. We're not here to make any friends or enemies. We're just here to assist the board in getting through the tasks that they have to get through as volunteers with as least disruption in your own personal lives as you can possibly have. I much prefer that you call me up and ask me a question, even though you might think it's not really that important, if it's something that's gnawing at you, because I'd rather ask you to answer the question for you before you get yourself in a jam than try to get you out of a jam. I had a situation one time where a board member called me up and they said, oh, I don't want you to review this restoration paving contract because I don't want to pay you to review it. But I need you to answer the question. What does this mean? I said, I'm not answering the question. What do you mean? I just need this one question answered. I'm not answering the question. I will review the contract as an attorney should, and I will provide you either with the advice or an addendum or something, but I'm not answering the question. So she acquiesced. This is the woman who was filing her own liens on unit owners that were delinquent. Unfortunately, she was filing construction liens. So whatever. So anyways, I did an addendum to the contract. Guess what contract went south? That one. Guess what saved them? The addendum. So this is what I'm telling you. Think hard and strong about how much liability or personal liability you want to incur before you make a decision not to call the accountant, the attorney, the engineer, the whatever. It's very important for your own personal protection. You don't want to share your assets that you've worked hard for with people that live in your community because you made a mistake, right? And as long as you get the advice of your professionals, you're absolved from personal liability unless you don't do what they say. So, and sometimes we have to put it in writing. Although we advise this, you did that. And we hate to do that. Most times we fire that client because if you're not going to follow your attorney's advice, it's not going to do either one of us any good. And you know, we're pretty reasonable in our answers to all of you. As I said, I became an attorney later in life, so my mind didn't get corrupted by the law at a young age. I don't get caught up in the dynamics of the stuff that some of these attorneys get caught up with. Number one, I'm the only attorney in this arena that I know that ever served on a board for 24 years. got a lot of experience from that. And number two, like I said, I had a strong business background before I became an attorney. So I look at things more logically. So what are the steps to your goal? Well, obviously, this first step to your goal is your willingness to serve. You've all done this. Bob's done it before. He came back. You continuously are learning. This is an example. This is one of my communities that, regardless of who's on the board, always asks for the seminar every year. Either come to our breakfast where we used to do it before COVID, but in the last couple of years, you guys have asked me just to do it for you, and I've acquiesced. I enjoy this. This is a great opportunity for me to touch base with you, see the community, look at the new stuff you've done. So I don't mind, and I don't charge you for today, so it's gratis. Seek assistance as needed. Don't assume that you're not allowed to ask questions. You are. Communicate a lot. 2 words, information and communication, are often used interchangeably, but they signify quite different things. If information is giving out, communication is getting through. So practice patience. It's tough, I know. My behavior at my own homeowners meeting is an example of that. I always tell my presidents, don't let the residents get to you. Don't let them make you upset. Just understand you're conducting the business of the corporation. And then I say, but shift me over 1 seat and make me the president. I'm going to take it just as personally as you do. So it's really hard to achieve that, but I would tell you that it comes with time of being on the board, more seasoned, like Andre. Andre, you are a different board member today, I would say, than you were when you first got on the board, because you learn, you understand more. When you first get on the board, sometimes you have misconceptions about how things are being done, and once you delve into it, you realize that you had a misconception and you're willing to acquiesce to moving forward. So that's a very good thing. The key to everything is patience. You get the chicken by hatching the egg, not by smashing it. So remember, it's very difficult to sometimes remain impartial, but the best way to do that is to not get into the conversation to begin with. We as a board have a policy. We don't discuss board business outside of a meeting. I think that there are people in this room that can attest to the fact that some of the dissension that happens within a community or within a board is caused by board members who speak out of turn with residents, I would say. And it's not that I don't want the residents to know what's happening. I do, in the proper forum, at the board meeting. You know, that's where we discuss. When you guys have a board meeting, I don't expect you all to go 7-0 in favor at all. I want you to bring forth your concerns, talk about your issues, tell us what you think should be different, explain it, and then take the vote. That's when it's over. The vote's taken, we move on. You know what? How long's Buena Vita been here? Since 2007-ish? Huh? 2004. Guess what? This community's been operating a long time, very efficiently, regardless of the fact if you're coming back on the board, long-term on the board, or new to the board. None of you have anything that you have to fix. It's been rolling along pretty good. Yes, there's zigs and zags required, but those are things that are decided by the board. So just, you'll not only have, when I say you should have a cohesive board, that doesn't mean you should all think the same. Just remember that. Different opinions, but the majority rules. I've had board members say to me, oh, I've got 4 people in favor, so I'm doing it. No, you have a board meeting. You discuss it. I don't want you to try to get, when you have that discussion, Richard, with your board members as to an item that's going to be discussed at a meeting that you want them to be familiar with, you're not supposed to sway them to your thinking. You're supposed to give them enough information so they can make their own decision. And that's really what makes a successful board, successful community. You guys aren't going to hate each other and fight with each other. You're going to understand we can have different opinions and different goals, as long as we operate as one unit when we leave the board meeting. And please, if I could leave you guys with anything, be a neighbor when you're out there. Don't let this position take over your life. It's ridiculous. There's nothing that you have to read. You don't need to go. You know what? I'm getting off track here a little bit. Do I have time? Okay. Every board member that gets on the board should get the last 6 months of meetings, the last 2 years of financials, and maybe the last 3 management reports. That's enough information to bring you up to speed to what you have to know. You don't need to know what happened 15 years ago. You don't need to know what happened 10 years ago. You don't need to know what happened 3 years ago. You just need to know where we are today, where we're going. And that's another reason when I tell you I give my boards that outline and I say do a mission statement, prioritize your projects for the upcoming year, decide the things that you're going to do in what order. You're all going to have a roadmap for the year. And you're going to know that I don't have to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and think of what's the next creative idea that I can bring forth. I will tell you, every community is the same, pretty much. You got the same concerns, you've got infrastructure, you've got memberships, you've got this. It's like when my kids got married, I said, make it work. Same problems, different faces. And that's really what this is. You've got the same problems here that we encounter in different communities. It's how you react to those things that makes you all different. Some boards let one person run everything. Some boards want the whole board involved, which is not a bad thing. Some boards let their manager run everything. It depends. It's what works for you all. And when you have this seminar, my goal isn't to make you understand 720, 617, or any of those things. My goal is to bring to you the resources that you need to be able to have a successful term on your board and not have it take over your life. You have professionals and other people that can worry about the details. You guys set the policy, you have people in place to enact the policy, and you can go to the cocktail party and not talk about what color they changed the carpet to. Any questions? Okay, Richard, we'll start with you and then we'll...
You asked us to hold them.
Yep, I appreciate it.
Yeah, one, when we talked about Zoom, one of the, I'll make a comment before the question is, what I find when talking to residents is that every one of us has been raised or grew up, I gotta think of myself first and my family second, and maybe, there's some hierarchy out there. There's always me first. What's best for me?
Right?
And that's normal. When you're on the board, you can't, it's still there, but it's way down because you can't think about yourself. But the people you talk to, the residents, they're still thinking about what's best for me. If somebody wants, we should start playing pickleball on Sunday, that's all he cares about. He doesn't care about masks or anything else. So it's an interesting mindset that we have to go through. He's talking about what's best for me, and I gotta be thinking about what's best for the corporation as we put it.
Okay.
That's the biggest change I have.
Right.
Let's go on. We're looking at doing this, we're not taking this, are we?
Well, we are. If it's specific to Buena Vista, we'll talk after.
This is specific.
Okay, move on to the next question. Because we don't know how to turn it off. We got to have Bruce come. Just kidding. No, the questions are good, though. Yeah, let's keep to the subject matter, and then we'll go.
We talked about a mantra that, a mission statement, a vision. Could you, or your office, provide an example or two without attribution of what one of those things look like?
I'll give you the outline. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Carrie, I think I've given it to you before. Do you still? We'll send it again. I'll send it with the board meeting notice thing. And she'll get it to all of you.
Okay. And then the rest, I think, are specific.
Okay.
The general, I think the challenge for me coming in here is that I hear a lot of concern about communication and how it could be a risk factor for us, whether it be an email or talking out in the community. However, at the same time, I'd like your advice on how we enhance communication, because I think one of the biggest things we hear is that, well, we didn't know about that. And we have many methods of communication, but they're not always the most effective for the majority of people.
Well,
so how do we balance
Okay,
Uh,
here's how you balance it.
please.
Number one, every unit owner here has the ability, especially with Zoom, to attend a meeting. There you go. Why is it your responsibility to tell them? They have the opportunity to find out for themselves. Number one. So if somebody says to you, there's no communication here, you say, well, are you aware of the link to Zoom? Carrie can provide that for you, and you can listen to the meetings, even if you live in Timbuktu. Okay, number one. Number two, you all used to have a newsletter. Do you still have that? There you go. There's your... Well, first of all, okay, Carrie's telling me the minutes are posted on the website, but if you follow my direction, the only thing in the minutes are going to be the motions in the second, a little bit of discussion. So that's not telling them that we're thinking of a field trip to the Dreyer Park Zoo. Who wants to go? You know, that's another form of communication. So you have a newsletter. There's another venue. I would suggest, and I have suggested to all my communities that are getting used to Zoom meetings, to continue it. I think it's the best thing that ever happened because, number one, we don't recommend that you record the meeting or videotape the meeting because that's, again, that whole thing about the insurance. Once the tape is not erased after you've done your minutes, you've got a liability issue. You're not supposed to be filming your meetings and putting them on your community channel ever. That's the worst thing you can do. And that's why I think Zoom is the best thing that's happened, because all of your members now can be at the meeting, they can watch the meeting, they can participate in the meeting, and you're not creating a situation that creates liability for your community. The third thing is that you're going to have communications that come out directly to your residents via email by your management team. So there's another communication. If there's something that a board member feels should be communicated to through the manager, their avenue is call the president and say, do you think we should communicate X, Y, Z to the manager? As long as the rest of the board doesn't object with Richard including that as a communication, then you just have Richard tell Carrie. If the board wants to have a look at it, hold it up to the light, you know, roll it up and smoke it, then you're going to have a board meeting about it. I'm going to tell you, relinquish a little bit of that day-to-day minutia to one person that you feel comfortable and confident with. So as far as communication, it's on them. It's not on you. Everybody has the ability to be communicated with.
Okay, well, let me just stop you there for a second, though, because if you said don't record. However, if the only opportunity is live and you cannot attend, but you want to be, let me just finish for a second, and you want to be aware of what's happened, is that if someone is watching on Zoom, they can record.
That's true. They can.
So once it's public information, it's public information. So I'm trying to understand
Okay.
the risk factor, and what we've done, we may have already set up a precedent, because if I remember correctly, maybe folks can help me out here. When we did the refurbishment, is that I know I saw that meeting online. It was not live. I was able to click on a link and see what the presentation was.
Well, that's a presentation. That's not a board meeting.
Okay, but
So
I need to understand the difference,
okay.
because
First
again,
of all,
it's communication.
Yep. First of all, every unit owner here has the opportunity to videotape a meeting. That's the law for themselves.
Okay.
That doesn't get your community in trouble as far as the reasons I told you. It's when the board does the official recording. That community I told you where they all shrunk down at the table, it's because the insurance company came out and they said, we need to see all the records. And the guy says, do you mean the 48 boxes that are in the attic or just the ones that are in the office? And they said, oh yes, we want those 48 boxes. And do you also want the recordings of every meeting since the inception of this community in 1968? Honest, I'm not lying. They opened a drawer that was full of tape recordings. They were lucky. They had good counsel. I got them a lot of money, but I'm going to tell you, they were lucky because all those minutes and all those recordings and all of that communication got them in trouble. So if John Smith is wanting to record the meeting for his own self, fine. He's allowed to do that. That's not an official recording. Number two, the only business that they have to know about is what was voted on. It's in the minutes, period. If they want to hear all the minutia back and forth, who said this, who said that, none of that matters. The only thing that matters is the board voted to change the carpet to green. Done. End of story. It's not that interesting. If anybody finds what you guys talk about that interesting, they need to start playing pickleball.
I think what Brad is getting at is that it's not the big stuff, but it's like, we're repainting a home. We'd like to put out, let's say that's going on, we did it last year. We'd like to put out in a monthly newsletter, hey, we're halfway down Via Elegante, we're on.
Well, that's appropriate.
And that would be like in a newsletter, or the bus trip to,
Yeah.
that's the kind of thing he's talking about.
Well, no, I don't think that's what he's talking about, because I just said those kind of things can be in the newsletter. He thinks that they should be involved in every minutia that happens at the meeting, and I'm telling you, they have the opportunity, they're on Zoom, and if they want to know what happened at the meeting, they merely have to read the minutes, because the minutes tell you what happened.
Do they want to put out like a possible community email, maybe from the manager that says, hey, we have a dead tree at the pool?
Listen, I'm going to tell you something. Your residents, I can assure you, do not want to know about a dead tree at the pool. I am constantly, all day long, hitting unsubscribe on emails that are junking up my life. If anybody wants to know about a dead tree at the pool, they merely should, I don't even know why they'd want to know that. Maybe we're,
Shell, I got to be, let me just clarify something, because I think it encompasses a whole bunch of different things. Is that we have a wonderful resource in Kerry. I don't want to overload it. And what we do have is that 100 emails a day of people sending things in. I don't want 20 people saying, what about the dead tree out by the pool?
Carrie, how many
Well, can I-
emails are you getting a
May I
day?
finish, please?
Yeah.
She said,
How many are you getting a day? Just,
Yeah.
and what are they about, just so I have an idea? So we can have more perspective as to your question. Well, obviously, yeah, and that's her job.
No,
Okay.
but I understand that. What I'm saying is that, and I think Kerry's probably referring to this, is that we have, aside from homeowners' issues with their sprinklers, is that if you have a dead tree, you have some rubbish that's over by a parking lot, whatever the case may be, is that if we had, say, a spreadsheet that we put on our website, where you know, if you have a concern, oh, wait a second, it's listed there. Here's the date it was listed, here's the progress, whatever. Let me just finish.
Okay, I get it.
And then, so if it's not on there, then on a work order, you send it in to Kerry, it's logged in, we know what's going on.
Right.
Instead of it getting 20 emails, I don't know how many you're getting, about the dead tree or the rubbish.
I get it.
And the other thing that I'm really concerned about, and this is why I'm asking about the communication. What all communities have a problem is, the number one communication they get is rumor. And I want to cut that sucker off at the pass. And it's a problem.
Well, then you're going to have to select those homeowners that spread those rumors and buy them houses in new neighborhoods, because it's
Well,
rampant in every community.
I'm not footing that bill.
Yeah. So let me just tell you about the emails. Okay, so Carrie, you get 20 emails telling you there's a dead tree. Well, let me just say that one, because that was his example.
Yeah.
You get 20 emails telling you that there's a dead tree. That, to me, is something that you probably, once you get more than 10, maybe you could once in a while, not every day or every week even once a month, update the community as to, we are aware that there's a dead tree. If it's something that you're getting a lot of comment about, yes, I understand that that's maybe something you want to e-blast out. We're aware that there's a dead tree, thank you for bringing it to our attention. I think, but where we get into a problem is, first of all, there's a procedure, I'm sure, if somebody has a work order, sprinkler heads, blah, 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 blah. That doesn't have anything to do with communication. You're talking about global communication, more or less. Because obviously, if a unit owner has a problem with their sprinkler head, she's going to have to communicate back to them, got the notice, we're going to fix it.
Let's be very specific.
Okay.
Because here's the challenge, is that if you don't have official communication, you've got unofficial. And I'm not just talking about people talking in a cafe. We now have a Facebook page for Buena Vita.
Worst thing ever.
Well, it's not ours. This is
Yeah, don't read it.
Well, we may not be reading it, but we've got 100 some odd people who are on it. That's a quarter of our community, And that means there's a lot of misinformation can get out there. And unless
Okay.
we are able to address some of it, we're going to be
I'm-
having a problem.
I'm going to give
ongoing.
I'm going to give you some advice. You're going to probably tell me I'm wrong, and that's fine.
I want to hear it, though.
Yeah. I had a board member in a very large community who just got elected to the board, came to our seminar. We talked about not communicating via social media with the residents. You shouldn't be on Facebook. You shouldn't be in Nextdoor. You shouldn't be on any of that stuff. Those are not official communications. Official communications come from management through you when they're necessary. So we advise our board members not to read those Nextdoor pages or the Facebook pages. 9 times out of 10, there's not as many people reading them as you think there are. Maybe there's a bunch of people on them, but you're going to go over them and you're going to see it's the same 10 people talking about the same 10 things that they were talking about 10 years ago. The other thing so we tried to tell this guy at this meeting, no, board members should not be communicating via social media, they should not be responding via social media, and they shouldn't be reading social media. If there's something that's a concern in the community, of course the directive should go to the manager to whatever publication you want to put out. Put it in the newsletter, put it in an e-blast, whatever. This board member said I was whacked. Didn't know what I was talking about. Continued to just defy everybody. Ended up getting the community literally into a huge lawsuit that cost them $700,000 to settle. So what I will tell you is if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. When I tell you not to read Facebook, I'm telling you not to read Facebook. You don't care what those people are saying. Because if those people really had something of worthy to say, they would say it to you at a board meeting. Period. End of story. I don't care what they say on Facebook. It's not the official communication of the community. Now, I do understand your concerns about getting the right things out there. Oh, how am I going to know what the right things are if I don't read Facebook? It doesn't matter what Facebook says, because I will bet you $100. I don't know if I have $100 on me. There's not more than 15 people talking to each other on that Facebook page. There might be 100 people signed up for it, but it's the same 10 or 15 people that are going blah, blah, blah. Guess what? Those people were probably doing that when Bob Dole was on the board last time. It's probably the same people. What do you think, Bob? Oh, Dale, I'm
Why
sorry.
don't you do more
Oh,
button and mash?
yeah, I'm elevating you to a politician, sorry. Yeah, no, I know. I said tongue in cheek. No, Bob, would you agree with that? That it's probably the same people that were complaining 15 years ago?
To be the same people over and over again. And there's the one person that everybody in this room knows that is the major instigator. of
Richard.
90% of it.
Richard.
The problem is that there are quite a few people who listen to it. And that's the real issue.
So
His audience is bigger than you think.
Well, here's your creative solution then. One of you writes not directly addressing those people, but a synopsis of what the facts are in a way that it's informative and not in their face all the time. Because I will tell you, you send everybody an email every day, they're going to stop reading them. If,
We do send a lot of emails.
well, I would say 1 or 2 a month covering a lot of issues would be good, because your people will be more likely to read them. And short, you know, I get letters from people that are 4 pages long, and I don't even want to read them. But I get a letter that's 2 paragraphs on the 1 page. I read that intently, you know. I even sent a lawyer a letter the other day. I said, the client sent me a letter that you sent to the previous council. I haven't read it yet, and I really don't want to. I'm sure it's regarding issues that were that we discussed a different solution for. Please enlighten me so I don't have to read your 4-page letter. And he said, yeah, you're right. You don't have to read it. So this is a fact. People don't have time to read all this stuff. So if you're selective and careful with your communication frequency, more likely are they going to read what you send them and understand it. And do it once. You don't have to do it over and over and over. If somebody says the irrigation doesn't work in the entire community and all this blah, blah, blah on Facebook, you can merely send out one time, the irrigation is maintained by this our contractor, wet checks are done frequently on this basis, and this is the solution, and this is the issues, and we've got that one time. And when that guy posts the same thing again about the irrigation, you're not going to answer it again. You already answered it. Asked and answered.
But here's my question for you, though, and I think it's in line with what you're saying.
Sure.
Is that we do have the resource of our website, so let's just say Kerry puts that out. Your issue, well, not your issue, but our issue is that a lot of people don't read, okay? They delete stuff. I mean,
Well, obviously, if they don't read, they're not reading Facebook.
There's nothing, well, you'd be surprised. But make a long story short, is there anything that we could do to keep an archive of saying that Kerry addressed that, and that it's a listing of different
Yeah.
things that, so guess what? It's there, we've answered it 15 times.
Well, she can list them in an archive on her
Yeah.
website via subject
Well,
matter.
exactly. Now,
But once they're not relevant anymore, they really need to be taken down.
let me clarify something that you said about the emails.
Okay? You're going
because-
to tell me why you have to email each other?
No, absolutely.
Okay, good.
The exact opposite. The exact
Good.
opposite is that I do not have a BV email,
Good.
okay? But then again, I'm brand new. So, having said that, is that if emails are to only go to Kerry, okay, if I understood you correctly, that emails from the residents should go to Kerry, not to board members.
I would agree with that.
Okay, so if that's the case, we have to inform them that this is the process, if I understood you correctly, is that you got a problem with the common areas in your home, goes to the manager. You got a problem with the manager, that's when it comes to the board.
Perfect.
And when it comes
That's
to
my
the,
line. I didn't even say it today.
when it comes to the board, then that should be at a board meeting.
Correct.
And that's how that would be handled. So, what I think is important, though, and we have to just figure out the way to do that, is that in the past, if I understand it correctly, if something was sent to the board, I've done so in the past, gotten nothing back, Hanley got pretty ticked off, like no one's even acknowledged it. So I think there's got to be...
That's why you shouldn't even have the BV emails.
Well, what I'm
right?
saying is that, so we need not to have a board member get emails regarding that. It goes to Kerry. There's got to be an acknowledgement. It may not be for her to respond. I don't want her responding at 11:30 at night. I want her having a family life.
Right.
And so we just needs to be some thought process.
So
on
here's
that.
what I would do if I got an email from a resident with a concern that really should have gone to Kerry, or it's not a board matter, or it's something that the board should deal with, or anything. I mean, if they're calling you up emailing you to ask you something personal about you, fine.
Yeah.
But if it's about the community, the management, the this, that, forward that email to Kerry and copy them.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
say, I forwarded your email to the manager, she will respond as appropriate. So then if you get an email from all 7 of them from the same unit owner, you're going to probably have to make a phone call to that unit owner and bring them up to speed. If you get an email from one of them and it's not an issue of concern, just say, send an email back that says, I will present this to the board and let them consider how they want to handle it, or something to that nature. So it's all about effective communication. It's not about not communicating with people. It's about communicating with people effectively and knowing when to talk and when not to talk. It's a very hard thing to do. I mean, like, I just told you my whole story about my life, and I see the lady in my neighborhood who's been the secretary for 20 years, and I drive by her and I want to ask her a question, and I got to keep my hands off the window, because it's tempting for me to ask her a question, because we want to have instant gratification, or we think it's just a little question, it's not going to bother them. But you times that by 150 people, it's bothering you. So again, forward the email to Kerry with a response to the person saying, I forwarded it to Kerry, if appropriate, she'll respond, otherwise she'll bring it to the board. Done.
And just a couple other real quick follow-ups then. I just wanted to understand, you talked
One more
about-
minute.
You talked about a mission statement.
Yes.
Does that encompass a strategic plan, or is that just a mission
It's
statement?
part of it. That's
Okay.
all a part of it. A
Okay.
strategic plan is a great thing.
And then, if there is a strategic plan that just flows with this, is that something that should be communicated once it's complete to the residents?
Not unless they ask for it.
Okay, so it shouldn't be posted on the website
I
or anything like
mean,
that?
you can post a synopsis of it if you want. These are the projects we're going to do coming year, something like that. But your actual business plan is your business plan. You're not here to operate as 449 people in unison. You're here to operate as 7 people running a business. So do you think GM gets all the shareholders together every time they do their
Oh, I
strategic
wasn't
plan?
I wasn't talking about that. No, but
But-
what you might do is that you might communicate to all the GM employees, this is your
Okay.
strategic plan.
Everything you're telling me is all things that you guys as a board will decide. So if you have these questions and concerns, you bring it to your board members. They will tell you, this is what we want to do. We'll vote, and it's done. So once the 7 of you decide how to operate this coming year, what to put on the website, how to communicate with residents, and all of those things, you have to stand down and let the board do what they decide. And that's the best advice I can give you. I can give you my opinion, which is what I gave you today. But the bottom line is the 7 of you decide amongst yourselves, not 1 of you, not 2 of you. You know, if your board as a group says, we do not want anybody responding on Facebook, which I highly recommend, that's what you do. If they say, we don't even want you looking at Facebook, don't look at it. I'm going to tell you, it'll drive you crazy. I'm trying to make your lives easier, not harder. And if you start thinking about what those 10 curmudgeons out there are concerned about, one of which we all know who he is, goes way back, and his name is appropriate. So anyways, the point is that they've been driving everybody crazy. They all have the best answer. Have they ever run for the board? Probably not. The best way to control what happens in the community is to be part of the board, so why don't they run? These people that are sitting in their houses, hiding behind their Facebook page, saying all kinds of crap about what they could have done better, well, why didn't they follow the process so they could do it better? All they need to do is throw their name in the hat and run for the board. You can't control the community from out there. You can control it by being on the
Well,
board.
As an extension of that then, Shelley, is that does the HOA have any liability or risk factor if you have a committee member who we've allowed to be on a committee that may speak out of turn, out of their committee about some of these things?
Board policy, you guys have to develop a policy. You should have a directive for your committee members that outlines what their responsibilities are, and that would be in there. You address that in that directive. Now, let me tell you something. I didn't tell you this one. We had I think I probably told you, some of you have heard this before. We had a community that had a rogue board member. They had made him liaison to security. This guy was out on Military Trail when a cop would stop a speeder, pulls up behind the cop, says, I'm head of security here. I'm the liaison to security. What's going on here? He almost got himself arrested a couple times. Then, this was during the mortgage crisis, he was breaking into homes that were in foreclosure, that were not occupied, saying that he was just making sure they were secure. I mean, this guy was doing all kinds of rogue stuff, tons of rogue stuff.
Just to answer you, Brad, it's in our charter for committees. Okay, each committee has a different charter, so it says different things what they're responsible for, things like that. You want to talk about social media? Okay, so my board members are not responding. But what about my board members' spouses talking? And I don't care what you talk about. Hey, I have a new dog, fluffy, blah blah blah. Knock yourself out. But when you say, oh, don't worry about vaccines, Terry, our manager's going to get CVS here. Well, that's an issue.
CVS isn't doing vaccines. Yeah, okay.
But that's what I'm saying.
Yep.
Where the board members talk to their spouse, and this goes on social media, and now the whole world is emailing you, Terry, oh my God, that's great news. When are you getting the vaccine? I want to sign up. Okay, Terry's not doing that. We can't get it.
Okay, see the problem? So,
Absolutely.
so this guy, the security liaison, they tried to get him off the board stupidly. They wanted to sue him. They said, we're going to sue him and make him stop. I'm like, dude, just get a quorum and vote him off the board. You know, get a quorum. This was a homeowners association, no quorum, no new board. So every year the thing would roll. They wouldn't listen to me. So they went and hired a litigator. The guy sues the guy. Cost them $500,000 for this lawsuit. And guess how they got him off the board? They got a quorum. They got him voted off the board. So you guys all have to be careful what communication happens, what happens. It's just insanity all the way around when you allow this bubble to burst and everything goes out there. You know what I'm saying? I don't mean that you're not supposed to be transparent, which is a word I don't really like because it doesn't really mean anything. You are supposed to conduct business in front of your community as you do. You're supposed to make decisions in front of your community as you do. You're supposed to set policy as you do. And you instruct your management team to enact the policies that you've to take forward the policies that you've enacted. You are not beholden to these 10 people who have been unhappy. You know, communal living isn't for everybody, and that's the crux of it right there. Not everybody can coexist within a community where they don't have complete and utter control over their destiny. And they're always going to find an angle as to why you all did it wrong. Well, my answer to them all is run for the board and change it. That's it. Done. End of story. Carrie made a good point. Just because you don't communicate via social media, please tell your spouses not to communicate on your behalf in social media. I think you guys do a very good job. I think for your sake and for new board members' sake, it takes some time to get seasoned. So I would just say, let it go for a little bit. Let these people who have come before you help you understand the lay of the land. You're not going to change it today or tomorrow, and you're only going to change it if they agree with you. Doesn't matter how great your argument is if you don't get a majority of your board. So what I would say is take the minutes, like I said, for a few months, the financials for a couple of years, and maybe some of the communications or whatever, the newsletters. Get yourself familiar with that. Nobody has to come in here and pull all the financials out for 15 years and go back 15 years ago and see what happened. It doesn't matter. First of all, there's a statute of limitations of 5 years. And second of all, you're blowing off a lot of steam for nothing because you've got an auditor every year that audits your records. So as long as they pass the audit, you're good. Try to remember that you're a volunteer. You operate as a board. If there's a concern you have, if they agree with you, great. If they don't, move on. That's all. Just make it easy for yourself. Make it easy for her, kind of.
So I want to go back to the communication, and then we talked about the benefits. That's one example too. I probably had about 10 emails. Hey, Carrie, are you aware that there's a benefit pool? Yes, I'm well aware.
Why do they think you're not aware? Okay.
Because it hasn't come down.
Okay.
But again, we're waiting on a village wellness permit. I mean, there's a process for moving.
Right.
But so what they were talking about, what Brad was saying is, well, if we send out a community email saying, just to let you know, we're well aware that there's a dead tree at the pool, you know, we're working on blah, blah, blah. Great, however,
Then you get a million questions?
I get lots of emails back, forget about that dead tree, well, that's great, but I have a dead tree, when are you gonna remove that one? And that is a fine line with communicating how much you wanna communicate, and then half the time they don't read the communication, and they just, oh, can I send an email? Oh, that's my time to email them back.
We all do that. We all read some of the words in the email and we miss the message a lot of times. Oh, and I have to go back. I do it. I have to go back and say, oops, I didn't see your last sentence. Okay, you got it. You know, all of us do that. We're all busy. You know, I always tell my clients, I don't practice law via email. If you have one question, email me. If you have 2 questions, call me. If you have 3, make an appointment. I am not going back and forth with all of you. Every time I answer a question, it brings another question and another question. Listen, I don't have that much time. If I had that much time, great. My clients can know when they're in trouble with me because they all of a sudden start seeing all these .10s on the bill. You know, when they take advantage of my generosity with my time, that's what happens. Buena Vita has not done that. Buena Vita, I got to tell you, this is a great community. I love you guys. I love being here. I love being your attorney. I think we've been through a lot of things together. I take a lot of heat for stuff that I didn't do, but I don't care because I'm not here. I get to go home. If I can take the heat off your shoulders and they think I'm the jerk, I don't care. That's great. Because that way you can go out in the neighborhood saying, yeah, I didn't agree with her either. But don't do that because you're not supposed to do that. But you know what I'm saying? We're here, all of us, to take the heat off of you as volunteers so you can live in your community and you don't have to be deemed that board member. You don't want to be that board member. You want to be that neighbor, you know? Remember there was a time when I was a little kid, we didn't have homeowners associations. If somebody got sick, somebody made chicken soup and they took it over there and they were friendly about it. You didn't have all these fighting and this contention and this blah, 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 and I didn't agree with that, and she was on that team, and they were on that. Whoa, slow down, you know? So if you could just try to be a community with a board rather than a board for the community. Not that you're not for the community, you're really for the corporation. Just keep telling yourself that over and over. I'm running a business, I'm running a business. Yes, sir.
I have 3 questions.
Okay.
And I've tried to make them pretty specific. The first one was about those voting certificates. What happens when 2 people who are married, one of the two, and the person who was the designated voter died?
Well, then there's no voting certificate required because only one person owns it, so that voting certificate goes in the garbage.
Only one person.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Or you wouldn't have a voting certificate if there was one person. But let's say 3 people own the place and the guy that was the voting member dies. She knows that and she goes back to that person and gets a new one.
Okay.
Yeah, that's her responsibility.
We have an ethics statement that we ask all the board members to sign.
Mhm.
Okay. It's not the same now as it was when I did this the first time. I don't even recognize it.
Who prepared it? Well, then I need to see that because I've never seen that because I would hate to tell you that I would not want you to sign something that might create liability. But what's your question?
I mean, the fact that you don't know anything about it tells me right away the answer to my question, and that is, this didn't come from you. And so, I thought, if this came from her, I'm surprised, but it doesn't contain anything about not divulging attorney-client issues to the community. Okay, but we're signing on here about our ethics as board members. And to me, that one was pretty key. So when that was missing, I said, you know what? When she comes, I want to hear what the story is, because I assumed that because it was that type of document.
Can I tell you something that happens when people sign things like that? They actually create liability for themselves that didn't exist prior. So I don't really think that you guys should be signing ethics statements because then in a lawsuit, they bring that into the courtroom, they blow it up this big. Okay, remember at the beginning of the meeting when I said that I didn't want you to sign the paper that said you read the law, you understand the law, you read the documents, you know everything that they say, you're going to abide by it, etc. Guess why? If you're ever sued, that thing that you signed is going to be blown up as big as this room, and they're going to parade that in front of the jury and say, here's a guy that knew the law, he knew what the Declaration said, he knew this, this, and this, and yet he sent a violation letter to my client for something that wasn't within his purview. I mean, that's what happens when you sign things that you shouldn't be signing. So personally, I don't think that any of, to have you sign, in my opinion, to have you sign an ethics statement as a board member says to me that somebody's questioning somebody's ethics. And I hate this because remember what they say, when you point a finger at a person, you got 3 pointing back at you. So when a person says to me, oh, that board member's on the take, do you know what my answer always is before I even have a chance to process it? Oh, no, they're not. And then I follow up with, well, wait a minute. I would never be on the take, so I never think that anybody is on the take. Therefore, I'm answering the question as me. But maybe they are on the take. You know what I'm saying? So what I just said to that person is really what I feel. When you're accusing somebody of doing something like that, I have to think that you may have done it in your past, so your mind works like that. You know, my mind doesn't work like that. I don't ever think anybody's getting something for nothing. I really don't. Because you know what? I would never take something for nothing. You know, I explained to you at the beginning that I do about 100 cable contracts a year. We built a new house. Comcast hadn't run the cable all the way. It's not a community. It's only 28 homes. There's no community cable. Comcast never was at my lot because it was the last lot on the street. I went to the Comcast office. I signed up, said, I'm moving in. The house will be done this day. I need the infrastructure brought in. I called Comcast. Oh, we canceled that. Why'd you cancel it? Well, there's no address. Well, there won't be an address until the house is done because nobody's ever had a house here. So I had to go to Comcast construction department directly, which I did, not them knowing who I am. I didn't say I'm Shelley Konyk, the attorney that does 100 contracts a year. And that person got wind of it and said, wait a minute, this is the attorney that blah, blah, blah. They called the regional vice president and said, Shelley Konyk's having a problem with her lot. He calls me up and says, why didn't you call me? I said, because I wouldn't do that. I don't feel like I should have any preferential treatment. That's how far I take it in my own life. So that's why I'm saying to you, when somebody says to me that somebody's on the take, my first answer is no, no, no. So when somebody's, I don't want you, please, I want to see this ethics statement, and I'm probably going to tell you to rip it up, and maybe we'll sign something less intrusive just to void that, if you already signed it.
Michelle, let me ask a question. Not even of you, but Carrie, I'm going to make an assumption that Carol did this because there has been, again, this rumor mill that board members were taking kickbacks.
Ugh.
And that's the reason I assume that was put in place to cut the crap.
Okay, let's turn off the tape. Now we can really talk.
Yeah. By the way,